Hi, it's Jason Mudd, and you're tuning in to On Top of PR, where I'm talking to Tru Pettigrew. Tru is going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I sense that this episode just gets better the longer you tune in, and I think you're going to really like what he has to say since he has come up with a marketing background and working in research and marketing agencies. He's going to share some interesting insights about DEI and why, and how to have courageous conversations. I'm glad you're here. You'll be glad you're here too. And here we go with the show.
Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. Today I'm joined by Tru. Tru is a award-winning marketing executive, inspirational speaker, life and career coach, and successful entrepreneur. His background and experience also includes co-founding qualitative research agency and 2 millennial and multicultural businesses. He's been featured prominently in publications such as the New York Times, USA Today, and more. Tru, welcome to the show. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. We're glad you're here. And today we want to talk about courageous conversations as well as DEI and why. So I'll just give the audience a little history. You and I met, I believe, in May of 2019 in St. Pete, where you came in as a speaker through my friend Chuck Norman, our friend Chuck Norman, and came to a group of public relations firm owners. And we're speaking to them about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I loved your energy and enthusiasm as a speaker, as an individual, and certainly for the topic. Your passion came through strongly. And I knew that you were somebody I wanted to ask to be on the show to share that energy and enthusiasm with our audience. And as we talked about just a few minutes ago, typical audience for On Top of PR is going to be a marketing or public relations leader that works on the brand side and often has, a pretty large enterprise or medium-sized company that they're managing and overseeing marketing and corporate communications. So with that, Tru, let's share a little bit about your thoughts and expertise with our audience today.
No, absolutely. So this is very inspiring for me to be able to have this audience to share some thoughts and perspectives with, because it's a world that I come from. My background, at least professionally, has been in advertising and marketing. I ran my own boutique agency for a number of years. And so I have some familiarity with a lot of the challenges and the benefits and all of the opportunities that come in this field, in this industry. And as I have segued into the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I still have a lot of my customers, my friends, and my clients that are still in the agency world. So this is a best of both worlds type of conversation for me, Jason. So I appreciate the opportunity, because that's an area that I'm a space that I'm very familiar with. And I, particularly from, well, not just PR, I was going to say from a PR standpoint, but even from a marketing and advertising standpoint, as we look at the climate that we're experiencing today with so much division across our country and across our world, really. But there's so many racial divides, political divides, gender divides, generational divides. We're experiencing so much division. And a lot of the agencies are responsible for either helping their clients craft appropriate and relevant communication for a lot of the issues and challenges that are going on across different divisions of diversity, but also they're being challenged for how they are stepping up and showing up and reflecting the diversity within the agency world. So I think it's a very relevant topic that you brought me on to discuss today. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion impact the agency world, whether it's advertising, marketing, or PR?
Absolutely. And I think it's, the social, responsible thing or corporate responsible thing for communicators and companies to not only be mindful, but be aware and, establish, diversity and inclusion in their efforts. So why don't we start with the very basics, and why don't you define for our audience who, may or may not be familiar or may not know the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion?
No, absolutely. And that's a great question because I do know in my work that a lot of organizations don't always have a clear understanding of the distinction between the three.
Hmm.
Now, they should always be linked, in my opinion, in my experience, but they are still very distinct. So,
Hmm.
diversity, by definition, is the state of being different, right? If you look it up, that's what diversity is. It's the state of being different, whatever those differences may be. They could be generational differences, they could be experiential differences, they could be racial or political or cultural or religious. It's the state of being different. And what I often remind people about when it comes to the definition of diversity is it is a state of being. It doesn't necessarily do anything on its own. It's static. It's a state of being. It exists, right? And then that's where equity and inclusion comes in. So equity is placing people in a position to be successful, helping people to succeed based on where they are. Now, by definition, it is fair and impartial treatment. But to put it in more layman's terms, it's giving people what they need to succeed. And oftentimes transposed or even confused with equality, where equality is treating everyone exactly the same. And there's a lot of value and nobility to that. But the reality is, we don't all need the exact same thing because we're at different places on our journey. And we have even many of us have different starting points and have been afforded different opportunities. So we could have the skill sets and the experience, but if we haven't started from the same starting point, that means we haven't been afforded the same opportunities. And equity ensures that we are making sure everyone has what they need to succeed. And then inclusion is the act of making someone feel a part of. And the operative word in inclusion is the act and also how we make people feel. So where diversity is a state of being, equity and inclusion requires us to take an action to leverage the richness of diversity that is available to us. And so that's where it's incumbent upon us to take the necessary actions to not only recruit and retain diverse talent, but also making sure that we are benefiting and leveraging the gift of diversity that is available to us. And so those three things should always coexist, but it is important to understand the distinction between the three.
I absolutely agree. Thank you for answering that question that I teed up for you so well, because I was going to ask you the follow-up question of, what's the difference between equity and equality? So you knocked that second question out of the park. So thank you for doing that as well. So let's go a little bit further because I like how when you expressed about, equity, this idea, and I'm going to misquote you, so I hope you'll correct and say it the right way. But you were kind of describing, helping somebody be set up for success, right, and figuring out what they need to be successful. So help me understand and help our audience understand, how do you assess what those needs might be, and how do you go about finding out where those either skill gaps might be, or confidence gap might be, or whatever the case might be? Like where should someone get started if that's something they want to focus on with their team?
Well, there's a formula, if you will, that I utilize, that I call GPS, right? We all have our own internal GPS, and I call it a GPS to purpose. And that's essentially identifying and assessing the gifts and the passions, and that ultimately will help us understand what the best area of service is for those individuals on our team. So if
Okay.
you and I are on the same team, it's important that whoever is in that leadership position that is been given, I guess essentially stewardship over our nurturing and development and how we can best contribute to the organization. It's important that they understand what your gifts are, what my gifts are, because the gifts will be different, but also
Mhm.
what you're passionate about, what I'm passionate about, because that may vary. But then it's the intersection point between the two, right? What you're good at and what you're passionate about, that is where you are best designed and equipped to serve the greater good of the organization and even the communities that we serve as an organization. And the same holds true for me. And so if that leader says, well, I'm going to treat the two of you equally. I'm going to treat you the exact same way.
Hmm.
Then if I'm an eagle, and if you are evaluating me based on how well I can swim, that's doing a disservice to me as well as the
Right.
organization. And if you're a
Sure.
shark and he's evaluating you on how well you can fly,
Right.
then that's doing a disservice to you and the overall organization.
I like that. That's great illustrations. Very nice. Okay. And so if you're talking to maybe a member of our audience who is tuning in and kind of says, when I look around at my current team, I look around at our, maybe our leadership team or whatever it might be, we all kind of look alike. We're all very similar. What would be kind of a first step that somebody could take, an action step someone could take, right away if there's not an opportunity to immediately start diversifying, their current talent? Maybe they don't have openings. Maybe there's a hiring freeze. Maybe they're just saying, look, we're not very diverse today. I'd like to get there. But at the same time, is it fair and reasonable for me to dismiss somebody from my team just because they don't have a diverse or ethnic background?
No, I think an important place to start is understanding the benefits of diversity for your organization,
Hmm.
right? And I think if you start there and understanding why diversity is important and why diversity matters, then you'll have a better understanding of how to identify the diversity that you're looking for, but more importantly, why it's important and why it matters.
Sure.
Because I believe when we don't have a clear understanding of why something is important, then dysfunction, division, and I guess you know, yeah, basically the dysfunction and division will occur and will take place, and you will
Sure.
do things in a way that is not the best approach for your organization, right? So just dismissing someone simply because they do not reflect an identity diversity, if everyone looks alike, I don't think that sets you up for the best innovative and creative ideas and solutions,
Agreed. Right.
because it's not so much based on that person's identity diversity standalone, but
Hmm.
understanding how the three forms of diversity lend themselves to the benefit of innovation and creativity. And so when I say that, there are three primary forms of diversity.
Okay.
There is identity diversity, what
Hmm.
you see when you look at me, what I see when you look at you. So when you look at me, Jason, you see an extremely good looking young black male, right? That's what you see when you look at me, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
that's
Yes.
the that is the identity
Right.
diversity, right? You see my skin
Uh-huh.
tone, you see my race, you see my perceived gender, you see a perceived age range, right? So
Uh-huh.
this is the identity diversity that we see. We see a white middle-aged female, we see a younger Asian male or female or whatever the case may be. That's our identity diversity,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And then the other form of diversity is experiential diversity.
Right.
We have different life experiences. We maybe because of where we grew up, how we grew up, parenting styles, geography, education, form of education, like that.
Hmm.
So we have different life experiences. And then the other form or the final form of diversity is neurodiversity, right? The way that we think, the way that we approach problem solving, our thinking styles. Now, ultimately, it's that neurodiversity or cognitive diversity that really provides a level of benefit and a richness of innovative and creative thinking that the organization benefits from. But what we need to understand is don't hire me just because I am a black male. But however, my identity diversity
Hmm.
influences my experiential diversity simply because the world will look at me differently, have different expectations, project these expectations
Right.
and stereotypes upon me that will require me to navigate the world differently than it may require you or a Asian female or Middle Eastern female or male. It will require me to navigate life differently than them, hence the experiential diversity. And it's our experiential diversity that informs our cognitive or neurodiversity. So that's why we have people that can approach something with a different lens and a different purview that gives us the gift of diversity that we all benefit from. So it's not just because you're white, just because she's a female, just because
Mhm.
they are black that you
Right.
want to bring them onto the team, but because of those reasons, that is what contributes to the neural and cognitive diversity and experiential diversity that you benefit from.
Okay, so for those of our audience who's taking notes, the three forms of diversity are what again?
Identity diversity,
Mm-hmm.
experiential diversity, and neural diversity.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that again. I think that'll be very helpful for everyone who's taking notes. And I hope they are. And while they're taking these notes, I hope they're also thinking about who might benefit from catching this episode that they could share this with, and they could also benefit from what you're sharing here, Tru. With that, we're going to take a quick break and be right back on the other side.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Hello and welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd. Today I'm joined by Tru Pettigrew, and he is someone I've gotten to know through the Public Relations Society of America, and we've been talking about DEI and why, and we're going to eventually talk a little bit about courageous conversations. So, Tru, welcome back to the show. And Tru, I wanted to ask you,
Thank you, Jason.
And is there anything else that you felt was important to cover about DEI and why with our audience before we move on to courageous conversations?
Well, the whole purpose behind DEI and why is because I've learned and we've learned that there's still a number of people, as prevalent as the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation has become across the country. There's still people who don't know what the acronym stands for, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's still a number of people who don't know what each word means and the relationship that exists between each word and how they are intended to coexist and support one another. So that's the whole purpose behind it, is to give people a basic foundation of, one, what the acronym stands for, what each word means, and how each word and the meaning behind it is intended to coexist. So from a solid business rationale behind why does DEI matter for your organization? Why is it important to provide people with a basic answer to that question? What is DEI, right? That's one. And then the next question is, why is it important for my business?
Absolutely. And I sense that, sometimes there's a motivation to do it for appearance sakes, right? But I think it's very clear for us working in the public relations and marketing profession that DEI has a huge impact on how we communicate with our audience, how we go to market, how we present messaging. And when you are missing those elements and that inclusion and input from those important audiences, that's when you see companies make PR gaffes and they make mistakes, and you kind of just face palm and think, how did they not see that coming? But when you're in a silo of a boardroom or a staff meeting and there aren't a diversity of opinions, or there aren't a diversity of individuals with unique backgrounds sharing input, obviously that's when those mistakes are going to be made. So when you make decisions in a vacuum and you don't bring in outsiders, or you don't have a diverse team, I think that's when those mistakes would happen. Is that part of the practice of your consulting that you do, is help companies with this?
It is, and it's probably more. It's a combination, right, with your world and PR and me. So I'd like to believe I'm more preventative, as well as the PR agencies, right? But I want to equip and educate organizations so that they do not have to minimize how often they have to utilize their PR and marketing agencies for crisis communication, right?
Right. Good. Yes. Yeah.
So
right.
Because that's a lot of what's been happening lately, and you gave some examples, right? So there are a number of organizations that, on the heels, we just I think it was just 2 days ago, right? We talked about the 1 year mark of the murder of George Floyd, and so a year ago, in Minneapolis, when George Floyd lost his life, or was murdered, then there were it sparked a movement, right? It sparked a movement across the country, and so many brands, organizations, and agencies were making these commitments and pledges to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and
Hmm.
to social justice.
Right.
And there were, and so now a lot of them are being held accountable for the commitments that they made, and it's creating a bit of a crisis for a lot of brands and organizations. And so
Hmm.
now the PR and marketing and advertising agencies are having to come in and help them craft some communications to help to, I guess, defend their position or help to figure out how uh, to address some of the backlash that they may be
Right.
receiving, because what they said and what they actually did
I
not
see.
gel, did not match
Yeah.
up.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where that can be a crisis in the making, or very important that they respond to that and do the right thing. So, I think it's worth mentioning to you and maybe those that are listening that we created in response to George Floyd. Instead of doing, a blackout on social media for a day or something like that, where we didn't post anything, and we changed our profile image to a black background, we asked ourselves, what could we do that would be, more meaningful than just showing, so instead of, talking the talk, what could we do to truly, give back? And so we created what we call the George Floyd Business Mentoring Program. And so every 2 weeks, we have an open mentoring program. We do a Zoom meeting every 2 weeks with black men who are in America, and we just talk business. And I facilitate that conversation. I give some business advice, not because I think I know everything, but just it felt like something that
Right.
could be a way that I could give back, having been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and help those who are either interested in entrepreneurship or just wanting to succeed in business wherever they are. And so, we've got a group of men that come together every 2 weeks. We do a Zoom call, and it's really we ask each other, how are you? How's your family? And how's your career? Right. And then where they have needs or questions or concerns, we together as a group talk about those things. And I it's like anything else. I think I get more out of it than the people participating do. But it's just a way that Axia felt like we could give back. And so would love to collaborate with you on that. Maybe have you on sometime to talk to some of these men that are part of this mentor program. And I think your energy, enthusiasm, and your knowledge would be very valuable to that conversation.
No, thank you for that invitation, and I welcome to take you up on that. I mean, and I commend you all for the work that you're doing, because that's one of the areas where our communities are holding the organizations that they support, that they patronize, and even where they work, are looking to hold people accountable. And particularly when we look at it from a generational standpoint. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about from a racial makeup. I mean, community, this just across the board, society across the board, particularly our younger generation, are holding these organizations accountable for, okay, it's great that you're going to make a statement, but now how are you following that up with action? What are you doing to be more
Right.
equitable? And so even if we look at the advertising, marketing, and PR industry, and if we look at the racial makeup, right, of the industry, that there are inequities in the industry. And
Right.
so,
Absolutely.
are there people that look like the diverse communities that you're marketing to and advertising to, that are reflective and representative in those agencies? Even as you are doing the work that you're doing, I'm sure you realize that, and I appreciate the invitation for me to come on board, because I feel like I could, support you in my knowledge that you
Absolutely.
realize that uh, seeing people that look like you helps to encourage and inspire and allow people to feel empowered that, okay, this is a space I could operate in. This is a place where I belong. And that helps contribute to the feelings of equity in an agency and in an industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased that we did it. Like I said, I get more out of it than probably the attendees do. And, it was just a way we felt like we could, go beyond making a statement and actually do something. So if anyone in our audience is interested in learning more about the program, you can go to axiapr.com/George-Floyd, and the program will load there. And You just fill out a form and you'll automatically be in. So we welcome and are certainly eager to have more people participate in it for sure. So we're quickly running out of time, Tru. So let's talk about courageous conversations. And could you kind of explain what that means and how you and kind of your platform for courageous conversations?
No, absolutely. Courageous conversations gives us an opportunity to talk about the things that we typically and historically have avoided because they make us uncomfortable. And
Okay.
I would suggest that one of the reasons that we are experiencing the level of division that we're experiencing in our nation today is
Mm-hmm.
because we don't talk about a lot of these issues simply because they make us uncomfortable or that we view them as taboo. What was
Right.
the kind of saying back in the day, the things that you never talk about are race, religion, and politics, right?
Right.
And those are probably the areas where we are most divided as a nation. And I
Right.
would suggest it's because we never talk about those
Oh
things.
yeah, sure. Of
How can
course.
I help to equip you to be a better ally and supporter
Right.
and help you to develop and exercise levels of empathy
Uh-huh.
if you aren't aware of what my real attitudes, concerns, challenges, and feelings are on a topic? And how
Right.
can I be the best supporter, ally, and colleague for you if I don't know how you
Mhm.
feel, but more importantly, why you feel the way that you feel about something? We
Right.
don't talk about race because we're uncomfortable talking about it. We don't talk about sexual orientation because we're uncomfortable talking about it. And the only way to really resolve and build those bridges of connectivity and understanding is if we at least start with a conversation. And we call them
Hmm.
courageous conversations because we realize it does require a level of courage to engage in those conversations.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's like being in a relationship and you never talk about anything meaningful with the person you're in a relationship with. That relationship's not going to last very long, right? It's going to be very
Right.
superficial. And if you're in a marriage and you never talk about your struggles or maybe what the other person does that really ticks you off, and then one day you're surprised when they hurt your feelings or they leave you, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I'm with you. And I'm a big believer in having meaningful conversations and candor, and not being afraid to ask what others might consider to be dumb questions, right? And
Right.
I think it's really important that when, especially when you're talking about, as you said, race, religion, politics, that someone not ridicule you for asking a question that might seem to be
Right.
either ignorant or insensitive or whatever the case might be. So, I think that's really important. And the example that comes to mind for that is, a lot of Caucasians did not understand what Black Lives Matter means, right? In other words, like they would
Right.
be quick
Right.
to say, well, all lives matter. And I think some people got really upset when that was a reaction. But I think genuinely there were some people who genuinely meant, no, I really mean that all lives matter. And they didn't quite view it under the lens that it was being expressed. And as that became more known and
Right.
understood, there was a lot more understanding. So like anything else, you educate and inform and engage people not by attacking them, right? But by lowering your
Correct.
guard a little bit and welcoming them into a conversation. And I know that that's how we can learn. The best way to understand someone who is different from you, in my experience, is to engage in a conversation with them.
100%. And courageous conversations is really built on the premise of what we call the heart, the head, and the hands.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's facilitated dialogue. That phase one is we encourage people to share their hearts. It starts with the heart. It starts about how you feel and why you feel about a certain topic. So if we're talking about race relations and Black Lives Matter is a topic that comes up, it's important that all stakeholders involved in the conversation understand how someone that is Black, how they feel about that statement and why it's so important to them, but
Right.
why they feel that way, and then understanding your white counterparts and colleagues' feelings around that, how and why it
Hmm.
evokes the feelings that it evokes from them. Now we're developing some levels of empathy and understanding that,
Yes.
oh, okay, I never saw it that way before. I never understood it that way before.
That's right.
So now we are, after sharing our hearts and we segue to the head, now we are in a better position to collaborate and co-create on thoughts, ideas, and solutions that allow us to figure out the best way to move forward together and coexist together, and to eliminate and eradicate any form of feelings of marginalization or oppression in any way. And then we segue from the head now to the hands, where we can put our hands to the plow and now take some actions, right? As we just talked about before, these are the action steps, but smart action steps, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound, that we will come together to hold each other accountable for. That these are now the action steps that we'll take to eliminate any sense of racial animus, racial discrimination, or racial oppression that may be felt by any stakeholder or member whatsoever. And so, but it starts with a willingness to share our hearts with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, that's powerful. Tru, thank you for being on the show today. If people want to get a hold of you, if they want to continue having this conversation with you or follow you on social, and I think you have an email address or email list as well, how do they get connected?
They can email me at truaccess1, the number 1, at gmail.com. And Tru Access is TRUACCESS, and then the number 1 at gmail.com. They can follow me on social media for both Twitter and Instagram. It's at Tru Access, again, TRUACCESS. And then Facebook and LinkedIn is simply Tru Pettigrew.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, we'll be sure to include that in the show notes, as well as listing out the 3 forms of diversity, heart, hand, or heart, head, and hands. I think those are all excellent examples and illustrations. Thank you again for being on the show. We really enjoyed having you. And I think this is a great episode, and I hope the audience feels the same way. If you enjoyed this episode and the comments that Tru shared, please be sure to share this episode with a colleague or a friend who would benefit from listening. And with that, this is another episode of On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd. Thank you for tuning in. Be well.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.